Welcome to the Pantheon Plus Rewind. Hey everyone, welcome to episode 66 of the Pantheon Plus Rewind, the only weekly podcast dedicated to Pantheon Rise of the Fallen and its awesome community. This week, we'll feature a breakdown of the last VIP developer roundtable, a community discussion about whether stats should impact harvesting, and as always, your questions from the mailbox and a little bit of lore to soothe your soul. So let's embark on our weekly journey to Terminus. So join me, Theric, and my valiant co-host Desrin. And thanks for being here, and we hope you enjoy this week's Rewind. All right, Des, I'm afraid I have some bad news for you. Are you ready for this? I can no longer be part of the Guys with Long Hair Club. So please take my membership card, take the keys to the clubhouse. I had to do what I've decided to call the COVID cut. And after about a year of hibernation and like not doing anything like stylist related or getting a haircut at all for that matter, I had to get it done. So Tuesday went and walked in and I think when she saw me, she was kind of like, oh crap, like this is going to take a while. You know, it's like that show, like Robin Williams comes out of hibernation, you know, in Jumanji or whatever it is and gets cleaned up. So she was brave. We got it done. I'm back to having a reasonable length of hair. It was fun for a while. Nice to role play a bit of a wild elf. But as they say, all good things. So that's that was my week, my big exciting event for a week. Such an exciting life I lead. How have you been?
It's been fine. It's been a really, busy week on my end for sure. It's funny that you beat me to the haircut though. I know it's been on my radar for a while now, and I can't quite make the call yet. But it's sure to come. I'll join you in the typical short hair male universe here soon.
The boring, standard, everyday guy.
That's right.
Yeah, right on. Well, hey man, when you do, you let me know and we can be friends again, okay? So good. I'm glad to hear you're doing well. Let's get right to it and thank our adventuring party for this week. And these are all folks who donated during the premiere of the previous episode. First up is Rildren on the Halfling Rogue. We have Crow Singer on the Halfling Druid. We have Gracelyn on the Gnome Summoner. And Brian Reck also on the Gnome Summoner. So 2 Gnome Summoners. That's never good. Ziplocks on the Darkmere Rogue, Sparrow on the Elf Ranger, and Bounty Code on the Human Wizard. So again, thank you everybody for donating during the show. As you know, we greatly appreciate it. And we're doing another giveaway this week. It's another Legat pledge this time, and it was donated to the show by Gracelyn, our Gnome Summoner, also known as Jadica, also known as Shuriken, and something else. Can't remember. The person of a few names. So anyway, they graciously donated a pledge to the show, which we are going to give away today. And this pledge, the Legat pledge, includes beta access. So that's the big part of it. It also includes forum access. You get a digital copy of the game, obviously. Early name reservation, early character creation prior to launch. You get a game title being Pantheon Explorer, another game title being Legat. Icon, a nameplate icon, and an additional character slot. And there's a couple cosmetic items in there too, a bag and a tunic. So if you want to get in on this, just if you are here for the YouTube premiere in chat, just type at Theric, Therek, with the YouTube play button emoji. And during the show, near the end of the show, in the lore section, I think is where we'll do it. I will draw your name. I'll draw names and pick a lucky winner from that pool of folks. So good luck to everybody. And Desrin, remind me when we get to the lore section to actually announce it, because last time I forgot. And I did it during the chat and it was fine. We had a winner and everything like that. But I tend to get wrapped up in what I'm doing, so I might forget. So yeah, no, that's exciting, and I good luck to everybody. The only restriction being if you've won the pledge before from the show, just maybe don't enter again, so that we can get somebody else a new winner. And that's the long and the short of it. But exciting stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I always love these giveaways.
Yeah, it's fun to get new people into the community. So with that said, Des, are you ready to set off on our journey here?
Into the wilds we go.
This week in Visionary Realms News and Notes. All right. This week we got a VIP developer roundtable. So we're going to go over that. That was released to the public on Wednesday, I believe. It was featuring Kilson interviewing the game's Pantheon's creative director, Chris Joppa Perkins, and associate game designer Adam Teham Mostel. So they answered questions from the VIPs about everything from high-level game design to even dropping a few beans along the way. So we're going to hit some of the highlights from that. And Desrin, if you have anything to add as we go through this, just say so. There's quite a bit of things to discuss here. The first one was the monk ability. Somebody asked a question about it. Now, when they did the monk stream, one of the things Joppa talked about was the punching, the kick, punch auto attacks, the arm, elbow strikes, that kind of thing, being on auto attacks, being passives, right? So the question was like, are they going to take up spots on the action bar? Because there were concerns, I guess, from this question from the VIP talking about LAS being a very restrictive system already. Do we want to be putting passive abilities on it? Now, Joppa confirmed that is the case, and it is part of a choice. It's part of decision making. So circumstances, he sort of brought up the situation where circumstances might lead you to want to take a more of an off-tank role. So you wouldn't want those abilities on your bar necessarily. You might choose to take more defensive abilities. And he also brought up the fact that Pantheon's going to have saved loadouts. So you can have different LAS setups, different action bar setups saved, and you can macro them, and then you can implement them out of combat, obviously. But you won't be, forced to go through the tedium of reorganizing your taskbar every single time. So what do you think about that, Desmond? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I actually kind of look at each slot on the active and utility bars as kind of like I see equipment. And when I think of, adding an ability, I think of more like kind of adding, a helmet or a ring or something like that. And so in that same sense of a lot of games we've have like procs and things like that, or clickies, I kind of think of the same way with the LAS. So the monk being able to cycle between having a lot of hits by having these things on their bar, even though they're not buttons you press, it very much influences your character and what your aim is during a fight, in the same way that a lot of high-end raiders in old games might have swapped equipment. Resistance equipment was big when I was raiding. So like, I think of it in a similar vein. So to me, it may not be a button you press, but I think as people get to know the LAS system, especially when we have like loadouts and stuff like that, I think it's actually going to feel a lot better than people imagine, just because it's adding versatility to your class, and the benefits of simplifying sometimes can be worth it. So if you do a kick and a jab on your bar, it's like technically I have 2 less, active abilities, but it lets me focus a lot more on my active abilities. So you could have a really, really good set of abilities on the other, is it six slots? 6 or 8 slots available.
It's 8 on the bottom, so 6 on the top,
the additional
right?
6 slots, right? And how I see it is,
right,
in certain fights, maybe, the mob has like a thorn shield or something like that. You're not going to want to be hitting that as much, and so you'll be able to kind of flex out of that. Whereas if you just always had this full set of abilities without that flexibility, you'd kind of be like, okay, well, it's kind of a less of a big change, because that auto attack is going to be happening all the time. Whereas something that only sits on your bar and you use it in a special situation, it might not feel as effective. So I get where this is coming from. We don't want to kind of continuously minimize how many buttons we have to press, but I think there's still going to be plenty to do and plenty to focus on, especially for the monk, like with all the gates and their mechanics are going to be really interesting and reactive to use. So I wouldn't discount this particular mechanism too much yet. Sorry, a little long-winded.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. No, I think it's a good point. I like what you said about the having like a thorn shield or something like where you wouldn't want that. You wouldn't want your character doing auto attacks. I think that's a great point. Something I hadn't even thought of. And I think it's like the play style. You might not feel like, you might not be in a place where you want to be doing as active combat, or maybe you're just grinding something that isn't necessarily, doesn't require all that much active involvement. You're just trying to get something done, and having those auto attacks on your bar might be useful in that situation where you don't want to be as maybe actively engaged. I like the flexibility of it. There was a couple comments, or one comment from the YouTube video that I really liked, so I cut it out and I want to read it here. It's from Clanton, and they said something about just having some reservations about the limited action set in general. And not a big fan of the logic that maybe passives will take slots where active abilities could go. They say it sounds a bit too limiting, specifically since you're creating such cool abilities, which is a good point, right? Like, so many of these monk abilities are so cool. Like, why are you forcing us to not use them? Why are you forcing us to put these passives on our bar? And they just sort of raised some concerns. So they say it sounds a bit too limiting, especially since you have such cool abilities. And, if you're trying to specialize for a fight, being able to utilize your entire class is something that people want to do, not by limiting it. So that's a concern we've heard about LAS in general before. And they're specifically saying that this isn't like I hate this kind of thing. They're saying, I love the game. I'm super excited for it. Just a worry I have. And that would count as some feedback. So, and Joppa said during the roundtable, criticism's a good sign. It's a good thing. People are helping to improve, and people are offering these kinds of suggestions. And I think this is the way it should be done. And to their credit, Kilson responded to this comment saying, this is something we're continually testing internally with our pre-alpha testers because we want to get it right before release. We don't take it as hate, and we appreciate the feedback. So much love to you. So just a affirmation that providing that kind of feedback is a good thing. And there are still kinks to work out, or there are some things with regard to limited action set that things like this where passives. It's a new concept, right? Who puts a passive on their bar, right? Like,
yeah,
a passive ability that is like a combat ability, a passive active. Yeah, right. So they sort of changed the language up a little bit, but it is kind of going to take some getting used to. Another person actually responded and said, this is Med Rider. They said, will the limited loadout just simplify the meta? And this is a bigger question, obviously, with regard to limited actions, but so we can go down a whole discussion. We won't, but Kilson responded to this as well, saying, not really, since we're working on the AI to be dynamic. Not all encounters will be the same every time you do them. So there's room for change with your loadout. And that leads perfectly into the next point from that roundtable that I wanted to bring up. They talked a lot about traits and dispositions. And I know, Desrin, you have something to say about this. So I'll get through this and you can read say your piece. Joppa noted that the solo players may have more challenge when it comes to the game because of traits and dispositions than you would in a group, because grouping does offer a tactical advantage, he said. And then Adam stepped in and said traits and dispositions, they aren't just randomly chosen for any NPC. So it's not like a spin the wheel approach. They said they could do that, but they don't think it would be very fun. It's much more nuanced and deliberate than that. They want players to learn the NPCs, but they also still want to get unexpected results sometimes. And Adam shared that it's not all traits and dispositions are designed to actually add challenge. This is one of the beans from the thing that I really thought was super cool. They want to have those lucky moments where you found something. So they're thinking of like traits and dispositions as like, something that adds an element of fun, or maybe a more lucrative type of mob, right? Well, like a golden orc or something like that. that really is like, to me, because that's like the whole, finding a rare mob times a million, right? Like, I found this rare mob and it's got this disposition that's gives it a higher chance to drop a really cool thing.
Yeah.
That's the way I see it. What about you?
That's all I would say, paraphrase, but almost quote it. I'm going to say this a few times, but if you guys have the time, definitely listen to this Dev Roundtable. It was very good. And Adam is a king. I love this guy. But like lucrative, it kind of sounds like that is not a disposition in itself, but a theme of a disposition. And for what it kind of made me think of, actually, was if anyone's played Diablo 3 or a lot of games that have a mechanic like this.
Yes.
So it makes me think of the treasure goblins. So you see a treasure goblin pop
Yeah.
up, and you just drop everything, throw your life away to try to chase a little golden goblin to, you know, get access to that crazy loot area or whatever. And, you know, I'm not saying this is Pantheon, but that same feeling where like suddenly everything changes and you realize there's something there that is an insane opportunity and you just have to drop everything to go after it. Oh my goodness. Like seeing this in a MMO is awesome, especially if it's something that's unpredictable like the treasure goblin.
Yeah. I hadn't even thought of traits and dispositions about like
Being
this. I hadn't
positive.
thought of them in this way at all. Right? Exactly. Not adding challenge, not necessarily adding challenge, because that's been the big selling point of them, is that they add challenge. But you can start to really get into this whole mindset of, wow, you can go different ways with this. You know, like you see the, you know, what if wealthy was a disposition? What if, you know, I don't even know, like an armorer type of mob, right? So it certainly can be extracted out and used in a lot of different cool creative ways. So I was glad to hear that. Yeah. And I also liked what Adam said about, you know, how traits and dispositions are generated, because I think that's a question that's come up maybe here. We've talked about it and perhaps on the show. How are they just random? Are they just all RNG? Like any mob can get any disposition or trait? And so what he's saying is no. He's answering that question, saying no, that's not the case. There is definitely a set that they can get, and it's not just
random. I'm really glad that he made that distinction too, because I think that was a question on a lot of people's minds, was like, okay, it's kind of just a random thing, so I'm gonna, you know, randomly run into this pyrophobic thing and it's gonna run off, and it's like, oh, that'll just be annoying, you know, more than anything. But I think what he's saying here is, you know, there's probably certain spawners, and I think they described this when they were talking about the AI. You know, correct me if I'm wrong here, but they're talking about the spawner having all these different, you know, options. And I could see, you know, mobs placed in a lookout position probably have a leaning towards an alarmist disposition, right? Like, and so if it's at least slightly intuitive, I think it makes it 1,000 times a better system, right? Because you're no longer just being like, well, you know, if we just randomly get this disposition, I guess we're going to just have to deal with it. It's like, you know, it kind of makes you look out and try to anticipate intuitive situations. Yeah. And I think that's a really good clarification from him.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Got to use your brain a little bit. Got a little foresight on these things.
Oh,
I have to mention, go ahead. I was just going to say, I was going to mention a comment that I thought was pretty funny from the YouTube video. It's from TJ, and they said, the disposition is fabulous, and the enemy throws glitter at you.
Oh, yeah. So many jokes could be made about like funny dispositions. I mean, who knows how deep they want to go. I think Joppa has thrown out some numbers on how many dispositions they want to do, but I think that's a system that, honestly, it's going to expand past launch. I bet you anything they're going to add new dispositions with expansions and updates and stuff like that, just because it's such a expandable system. I mean, there's so much you could do with that, so many things that could be affected by dispositions. And one other thing on that note, because he did mention he you know, dispositions might make solo play a little bit more challenging, and I obviously it was said by developers, so I am inclined to agree with that. But also, there was a discussion had, not during this, but elsewhere, that kind of brought up, well, maybe on the flip side of that, you know, some people's loadouts are probably going to be kind of inclined to deal with certain dispositions really well, and maybe even take advantage of them. So on that same note, I wanted to at least give a little bit of pushback for, you know, folks kind of maybe that they play solo more often, that see the disposition system as just like another hurdle for them. I would encourage you to kind of consider maybe it's more about seeking out, you know, specific traits, specific dispositions, finding your niche where you can solo really effectively. And I've been saying this a little while, but I want to really drive it home. is that soloing in Pantheon, I feel, is going to be a lot more about choosing what you're going for. So just try to kind of get in the habit of thinking that way now, and I think it'll make your solo journey a lot easier when Pantheon comes out.
Sure. Yeah, it's good advice. Good advice. Or you can just, get some group mates together and not solo.
Well, there's
That's your
always
other
that,
option. Yeah. No, I'm just being goofy, but play the devil's advocate a little bit there. The next question from the roundtable was talking about how they test. Are they taking like multiple group compositions into account when they do testing? And I like Joppa's answer. He said, they tend not to do that because it tends to sterilize things too much. They don't want to over design. They want to allow for player creativity and emergent behavior and emergent gameplay. Adam added that it's better done through individual class identity testing, and he sort of shared a funny story about Nefel doing some testing and dying like 50 times just in the name of testing. So I think that's probably the right way to go. You can't account for every situation. It just makes a lot of sense. I mean, we hear that sometimes. Like what about a group that's just all what if one class is clearly better at something? Why wouldn't you just make a group?
The all summoner group.
This composition.
We got to talk about the all summoner group, right? How is the all summoner group gonna? Is it basically that's kind of a joking example, but I do also really like his answer here. I think it takes a clear, you can make a clear divination of how their methodology is, because they, I think, embrace more than I would say any other game company out there right now making an MMO that I've seen. They embrace the idea that little imbalances can actually be big gameplay. And so I think this
100%.
Answer really kind of anticipates that, and I appreciate it a lot.
Yeah, and not even beyond all that, even just the amount of work it would take to test different group compositions and like get that all sorted out. Like, I got time for that. Build the world. Don't worry about that stuff. So, the next one was perception related. It's a question, sort of taking a lore perspective, an in-game, in-character question, saying, how is perception being imagined from an in-character? What is it? What is it that's speaking to you when you get a perception ping? And I like Jop's answer. He's talked about it equating to intuition. It's meant to feel like your natural intuition. So like when you interact with something that gives you a perception ping, or you're in the midst of a perception ping and you're doing it, you're being connected to something that's beyond you. He said it's driving your intuition. It's kind of like a companion, I think is the way they phrased it. So kind of a neat bit of a bean, actually. I mean, if you really want to take that to the, expand on that a little bit from a lore perspective, is there something out there beyond? Is there something that is driving perception? Is there an entity? There is, the lore does have some pretty mysterious entities that are very unexplained and very nebulous, I guess, if you will. So maybe that's something there. I don't know.
I see. Even notice he did mention the sight stone, and he in the if I recall in the DRT, he kind of says, "Oh well, but that's something for another day." So.
Yes. And then Adam was like, I don't want to reveal any more than Joppa has already. I'll leave it to him to how much to reveal. So it did sort of feel like a bit of a pull the curtain back a little bit.
They are like really starting to iron that out right now. So like they're working on perception a lot. And so it's fun to see a little tiny nugget there. But yeah.
Yeah. And that's what Adam was brought in for, was to work on the perception system. He says that. He's like, that was my job, and still is. He's just been, they've recognized his abilities and brought him in to do other stuff as well. So
yeah.
Yeah. So the next one was timelines. And Joppa noted some good news. They may actually be able to start on some of their HDRP conversion and their networking streaming sooner than they may have expected, which is good news. Now, don't ask me any questions about that because I don't know anything about the technical side of stuff like that. You probably know more than I do. But in any event, it's good news, I think, that they're on track or ahead.
Yeah. I mean, there's really nothing to add to that that's kind of worth going over. The news is the news here. We could kind of speculate on why. If they've moved stuff around, or if it's something technologically that has just turned out to be a little easier than they were expecting, or just it could be anything from a Unity timeline that they were expecting to take longer. There's a lot of things that could go into that, but just take it as good news.
Yeah, exactly. Quick one here. They said class design, and this is from the last PA test. They said every class got a few new abilities in the recent PA testing. So that's good. And then the last one, second last one, passive abilities. So Joppa just clarified something that we already know. He said there's two types of passives in Pantheon. There's innate and combat passives. So the innate ones are the ones that are always on. These are the ones to think of like racial passives. There's no input from the player. They just exist. And then there's combat passives that don't have to be clicked on, but they do have to be on the action bar to take effect. And there was a comment in the unofficial Discord from somebody asking about racial passives. Do they have to be on the hotbar? And Joppa clarified they don't. They don't need to be slotted at all. So just a couple good clarifications there for people that might not know. The last one is talking about an area of Wild's End that sounds like they're working on. They talked about some ruins, giant ruins, because the question was like, how much are you using like size as a element of design in the world? So like, are you making things really huge, and the players are really small in comparison? And it was sort of brought up that the giant ruins in Wild's End are a good example of this. So I've never really don't recall hearing anything or reading anything about this, and it's an interesting concept to begin with, but that's really all we know about it at this point. The size and traversal in the world, how the grandeur of the environment is having a role in that. So pretty cool stuff.
I remember him kind of talking about, if I recall the conversation being, how like design direction, how is the player supposed to feel in the world, and it was mentioned their direction is to make the world feel bigger, which I will admit I am usually not for. I actually am not a huge fan of game worlds kind of making you feel like you're really small. Like if you walk through a doorway and it's like, twice as tall as you, like it always kind of threw me off a little bit. And I understand why they do it and all that. It's something that I always notice, and I'm usually kind of against, but I'm eager to see how they pull it off. I'm open-minded on it, but since it was mentioned, it did kind of get my brain thinking that, and reminding me that, we're probably going to have, 15-foot tall doorways, and I just have to be okay with that.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I think you are going to have to be okay with it. I'm the exact opposite. I love that kind of stuff. I love when the structures are huge and you feel like this is a massive thing. Remember in that Amber Fate stream couple years ago now, where they go into that place where the dwarves are sort of milling about and they're just
huge
giant doorways. I love that stuff, man. That's my jam. I know why you're playing an Archive now. You don't want to ever be a small. Do you ever play small races? I would imagine you would.
I've played. Yeah, I've played a lot of small races in the past. I kind of go either way. I don't really have a preference, honestly. If anything, I probably prefer as human sized as possible, just for the averageness of it. But yeah, and okay. I do like, though, if we're talking about these giant ruins in Wild's End, Wild's End is starting area for some not very large people as well. So I imagine these
half people, you might say.
They may be half size. But I love that there's a large race, a potential, ruins, of a large race in a small race's area. So it's just going to be even more like kind of this contrast. I love contrast. So this actually really tickled me. I can't wait to see, their progress on Wild's End. We've got a few glimpses of Fairthale, but Wild's End.
Yeah, I know. Me too, man. That was my answer when somebody asked, like, what's the next thing you want to see? I was like, Wild's End for sure. So just to wrap up this section, then I just want to note that the Roundtable is also available now on audio download on Spotify. They posted their RSS feed, so you can, if you have a podcast player, you can just input that manually as well. But they are on Spotify and soon to be on iTunes as well. And this is how I listen to podcasts. I don't listen to them like through, if they're only on a YouTube video, I don't do that. So I love that they did this, and it's the second listed podcast on my podcast app, and behind my own, of course.
Oh wow!
But
I
anyway, anything else on this one?
Just to let people know, like, if you have the time, please listen to this one. It's not saying the other ones are bad. We've had some amazing roundtables in the past, but this one, in my opinion, was the most clean, the most professional, the most clear answers. I mean, they're on a roll with this one. If all dev roundtables are like this, it's going to be a consistent, you've got to do this. This is an hour of your time that you will not regret.
Yeah, agreed. And that's it for this week's VR News and Notes. When the Pantheon community speaks, we listen. So let's dig into the forums and fan projects to see what the discussion's all about.
All right, so this week we've actually got 2 introductions on the official Pantheon forums. I know, it's amazing. Right? So the first, we've got Dark Matter. So he says he is someone who looks forward to be a contributing and positive force in the community. I appreciate that a lot. And we've also got Piet6, I believe, VI being, hopefully I got that.
Yeah, I would say 6.
Yeah,
6.
Or we could say Zex, because they are Austrian. And they say that they're an old WoW veteran, and they're looking forward to getting into alpha when the time comes. As with, many, it seems that Piet is also hoping that Pantheon has what it takes to move on from WoW. Because I see this a lot, I'm a WoW veteran or I'm an EQ veteran. Mm-hmm. A lot of people that still play games that are, we could say are old. And they've just been looking for this next thing. And man, I hope they find a great home in the Pantheon community. So welcome to both Dark Matter and Piet6 to the Pantheon community. Hopefully you hear this and feel welcome.
Yeah, absolutely. Welcome to both of you.
Anyway, so we on the community discussion side, we've got a topic here that's seen a great amount of engagement, both on the community forums and from Nefel. So the topic was originally posted in the official forums by user Jobson, titled "Should Stats Impact Harvesting?" So I'll summarize most of it here. Obviously, check out the full thread in the link in the video description. But basically, Jobson is suggesting that perhaps regular stats like Constitution or Dexterity affect harvesting skills like woodcutting or skinning. They also note that this could make side grades more valuable, and that players with naturally high stats in a certain area would gravitate towards harvesting particular resources. So before I dig in, I just want to see, what are your first thoughts on that, Theric? If I pitch that.
Well, my first thoughts are, it's a neat idea, and it's not something I've really considered before. So I always like questions like that. So my mind immediately goes to when you're creating your character and you're putting stats in, I've played a million RPGs in my lifetime, and there's always stats that you just ignore completely, right? I usually play Rangers, obviously, and then Dexterity gets my full attention. I don't put stats into Intelligence because as a Ranger, it doesn't matter at all to me. But then I thought, what if you did have something like this? What if I was playing a Ranger and I wanted to be good at harvesting because I'm all naturey? I wanted to be good at harvesting herbs, wild mushrooms, who knows, whatever. And what if my intelligence affected my ability to identify those things? I think that there's something you can do, because if my vision for my character is a combat only Ranger, then I can still ignore it. But if I want to have a more well-rounded Ranger and have some utility abilities, on the Classes 101 streams we always grade the classes based on utility is one of the areas we talk about. And I find that a lot of games tend to ignore that side of things. So I think this is an opportunity. If you wanted to do something like this, you could sort of make harvesting stats that affect harvesting. You make your character a little more customizable and sort of disrupt the I'll say the meta, but more like the template a little bit for a character build, because like they're just junk stats, right? Like intelligence is a junk stat for a warrior. Strength is a junk stat for a cast for a wizard maybe. Although Choppa has talked a little bit about those stats not necessarily being junk stats. There's a stream where they talk about this a little bit and say, we want like a wizard with a high strength, their fireballs might be a little bit more impactful. So you have to go back and search for that to get the exact quote. But I do think that there's something to be said for this. And I like that it sort of goes against the grain a little bit.
Yeah.
So those are my initial thoughts, but I'm sure I'll have more as we read the comments and I sort of think, oh
yeah. And I think a general gist of the question kind of implies the additional importance of other stats, where we've been so kind of pigeonholed into a main stat, maybe two stats that your character, I mean, if I recall, like even WoW retail right now, like you basically just have two stats. Like you kind of can't have other stats. And so I think this is a great introduction of like, well, what if, we tried to make other stats mean things, to give people incentive of maybe not just cramming everything into the one stat. And again, like you said, it's been talked about a little bit before in the context of like a wizard fireball and stuff like that. But the first thing it made me think of was, again, Mortal Online 2. Sorry to bring this up again, guys. But so certain races in that game, which are basically like their classes, because it's just race, they tend to gravitate naturally towards what they're typically good at. So you would imagine the big, like giant bulky class, the Thurzar, they typically are combat role. They typically are meaty and probably aren't going to the alchemy bench, Like, so on one hand, I see that this makes intuitive sense, and it actually, to me, gives races a particular identity when the race or the class has a certain bit of advantages in certain areas just for how they are, or how they start. Yeah. But as you'll see, when we get to some of these responses, we've got some really good pushback on this. So let me start with one of the forum responses from Dorothy or Dorotea. They say, I prefer allowing characters to be able to harvest without significant limitations tied to their adventure class. As someone that focuses on harvesting to a significant extent, I like the idea of separate harvesting and or crafting skills that ideally can be improved by harvesting and crafting. So I very much like the Vanguard theory of separating adventuring abilities and crafting and harvesting abilities to the greatest extent possible. So
right. So definitely wanting the hard separation between them. Yeah, and I mean, I think that most games do it that way, right? Like, not a lot of games see the overlap. Or if you wanted to create the best harvester, and one of the races has a +2 to, Constitution, let's just say, for example, because that's just their racial bonus, and Constitution plays into harvesting, like mining, let's say, for example. You're going to see a lot of that race doing mining because they have an advantage there. So I don't think it restricts as much as maybe Doherty thinks. Maybe I think it might encourage or it might enhance, but I wouldn't say it's restrictive. I don't know.
I've been like holding off using the term min-max, but I think that is what a lot of these responses are going to be talking about is if there is an advantage, people kind of feel like they have to choose it now if they're going to be, if they want to mine. Now they have to choose this, which is, 100% in your head, but that's probably a conversation for another day. Let me get to, we've got Gintoki here, or Jintoki, from the forums as well. They say, seems like a cool idea, but these types of things usually pull out the worst type of min-max players, like I mentioned. It also cuts down on seeing odd race and trade skill combinations, because they say who wants to see an ogre jeweler one day? He says, I do like bringing back armor that gives you a bonus to the skills, though. Kind of taking this conversation a little bit different direction. So if stats give bonuses to harvesting, would you end up having to have different sets of gear for harvesting?
Right. So that's another part of this too, is that we're not talking about just inherent stats. We're talking about gaining stats from your equipment. So there's going to be a whole, you know, there's going to be a whole tier list or tier rankings of equipment for the harvesters out there, right? Like they're going to be really wanting this certain piece of equipment because it has the stats on it. I think that's fine. I like that. It creates another form of economy, right? Like we need drivers of the economy, and that's one of them. You know, when there's more demand for stuff because of different reasons, I think that's a good thing.
There's an element of this that I actually just thought of as a real world, an example from another game of how optimized do you want to be to just do a thing. Like sometimes it takes more effort to completely optimize for very little return. And I actually just came across this in the New World beta. I had this habit of collecting all of the specialized harvesting gear that I could find. They have these, various pieces of armor that give you, slightly better chance of getting rare drops from logging, slightly increased, all these little tiny increases. But if you put on like a full set of logging gear, you go out logging, you're going to get better results. But you know what? By the end of the beta, for most of the time that I was going out and harvesting, I've just kind of left that stuff in my stash. I'm like, I'm just going to log and get what I get, or I'm just going to mine and I get what I get, because it's actually more of a hassle. Like I had to kind of weigh it in my head. Like, do I want to completely swap out my gear and then run out into the wilderness and hope I find some mining nodes that I might have a, slightly better chance of getting rares from, which is good? Or do I just want to go out, have what I have, get what I get? So I kind of feel like as long as it's not prohibiting you from doing the activity, it might actually have some merit here.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you.
So do you want to read some of these Twitter things here?
Sure. Twitter things. I will read the Twitter things. The tweets, if you will. The first one was from Chobinhood. They said, what this question is really asking is, should stats affect how quickly you make money? And I believe the answer is no. Crafting will be incredibly lucrative on its own if you're dedicated enough. We don't need crafting twinks funding combat twinks funding crafting twinks. I don't know, man. I kind of like funding my twinks with my better characters. Should stats affect how quickly you make money? That's what they're saying. That's interesting. I think it should.
Hey.
I think it should. Why else would you want the stats then? I don't know what purpose they would serve.
Yeah, that was kind of my pushback as well. Was like, well, if you gear your adventuring character and you go out farming, you're making more money because you're able to kill stuff faster or able to kill stuff that other people can't kill. So to me, it's actually just kind of blending those two worlds, So in this sense, not saying there aren't great arguments against this system, but I will push back on that particular point there. So Chobin, you should join our Discord and hash this out, because I'm sure you have more thoughts on that, and I'd love to talk about it.
Yeah, I think they're in our Discord, so I definitely think that you should reach out to Desrin and have a long, drawn-out conversation and tell him why yes, he's wrong here.
Exactly. We've also got Frank here. He says, I like the idea of stats affecting harvesting. One thing I loved about Final Fantasy XIV is the harvest classes have their own gear to equip and their stats quests or stats, quests, etc. For me, it makes it more interesting to play with specializations than just randomly running around and kill harvests like in EQ, EQ2, and WoW.
Yeah. Final Fantasy 14, I think, is sort of the go-to game when we're talking about something like this. With their, I'm not an expert. I've only played it very limited amount of Final Fantasy 14, so don't quote me on anything. But they're the way of, you think of a job, right? Where harvesting is a job, and it's not just a trade skill. It's like, this is your whole character. His identity is this harvesting. So stats, I believe, play a role in Final Fantasy 14, like they're talking about here. So it's a good bring up. Yeah. And then the last one on Twitter is from Jamie. They said, I feel like every other game wants you to be able to do everything, be everything. No one's any better at one thing than another. All classes are equal. All races are equal. All things are equal. What kind of fun is that? The fun of EverQuest was that it mattered at one point. So yeah, again, it's a good reminder that, we're not looking to be balanced in every possible way. Having things unbalanced is good, fun, and challenging, and adds a complexity to the gameplay that I think we're all sort of ready for. Yeah. So just a good overall statement, and that's what Pantheon is sort of going for. They're definitely, like you said earlier, Desmond, you brought it up. You said they've talked about how important class imbalance is in a game like this.
Yeah, so I'm 100% on board for that. And like, let's just be real. Who's going to make a mining character? Like a very small percentage of the population. Unless unless we're, like I said, if it keeps you from actually doing an action, then it might cause some turbulence. But if it's just a matter of, maybe if you have high, dexterity with skinning, you have, a 5 to 10% higher yield. It's not really worth making a new character for that. You might want to consider what your stats are on your gear or something like that. But it's like, how about just, play along with what you have, and then naturally find that, hey, my buddy, maybe I'll let my buddy skin these things instead of me, because he just kind of has this natural inclination. Yep. And I like how that plays off of things. That's a great And I will say again, in New World, that same thing happened when I was playing with friends. It would be like, oh, well, you have, this inclination towards this. You may as well get that.
That's a great point. Adds to the group identity, the group necessity for that Pantheon's going for. If somebody else is a better harvester, call your guild up. Say, hey, I found a really good node. Come over here and get this.
Like it. So finally, I did mention Nefel actually responded to this. So I'd be remiss if I didn't, add his response. So I'm going to take a big breath here. He says, the current plan, which I reserve the right to alter in the future, is that specific resources will not have different quality grades, with one exception. So there will not be high quality ore or premium grade wood or anything like that, at least not right now. The exception to that is hides and pelts from skinning. We are planning on having some high quality grades or some different quality grades when it comes to skinning. Specifically, these quality grades will be here to help support specific types of crafted items. So, if you're an outfitter, by default, any kind of hide may be useful to you. But if you happen to get that pristine hide, you will likely save it for a very specific and unique thing that you want to make. So, when it comes to crafting, we're not currently planning to have different quality grades of the same crafted item. That would actually be a step backward for our system. Remember that in Pantheon's crafting, you'll be able to vary which materials you use to get different stats. This means instead of having different recipes for a bronze sword or an iron sword or a cold arc steel sword, you'll have a single schematic for a King's Reach broadsword, and the stats you get will be determined by what kind of sword blade you decide to use with it. Maybe that sword blade is made of common iron, or maybe you've used more exotic metal choice for your sword blade. The stats will change depending on which you use. That stat progression won't be perfectly linear either. So while a more exotic material will probably make a longer sword or a stronger sword, there may still be some trade-offs involved that you'll have to think about. This also gives us room to introduce different and unique variations of craftable swords at all level ranges. For example, instead of that King's Reach broadsword, Maybe you have a schematic for a Rainfall Scimitar. Or maybe you've got a rare schematic for Ember Feyblade. As far as the original topic of stats and harvesting, all I'll say for now is that I'm enjoying reading the discussion and hearing everyone's thoughts. So, sorry to derail a little bit there. It was in response to basically asking how these stats might influence quality grades. So it's a bit of a derail, but still really good information. Definitely worth responding, as it seems Nefel has his eye on it as well.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, Nefel is the crafting dev for VR. So any information, whenever a dev speaks, we listen carefully and closely. And I'm not as crafting minded as a lot of the community, but there is a big part of the Pantheon community that's very crafting minded. So I think a lot of this is probably music to their ears, or at least food for thought. So good stuff. I'm glad you read all that. It's a good
Absolutely.
Catch.
And if you want to contribute to that forum post or their Twitter post where they highlight it as well, it's going to be on their official Twitter or the link in the description for the forum thread.
Nice.
All right, then that's that for the community discussions. Are we ready to move on?
Mail on a Sunday? That's right. Let's check the mailbox. Okay, mailbox time. So we got 3 questions, and I will take the first one, and we'll do these, not super long time on each one, but we'll give our answers. The first one was from Moobert, and they said, since Monk is either finished or very close to being so, VR have stated their next goal is Ranger and Summoner. Of these two, what do you think would be the hardest thing for the VR team to handle for the class implementation, either coding-wise or fantasy-wise?
Oh, sorry.
So you're 100% right, though. I mean, they've talked a lot about how difficult Summoner and the pets have always been sort of a bugaboo for them. Like, they really want to get that pet mechanics, the coding for the pets and how the pets control in Pantheon very right. So I think that's the obvious coding answer is Summoners. I don't think I don't know, man. It's Rangers. I think maybe the tracking is a bit of a pet peeve, and this is totally me speculating, because when you look at the class listing abilities on the webpage, tracking isn't there. Now, it's not a complete list. Nobody has said tracking is not in. I would be crushed if it wasn't. And I trust the wizardry that is Kyle and as a lead program of VR, that he can do this kind of stuff. I really hope tracking is not a technical problem, because, there is a part of me that says that feels like it might be, but that's just me being neurotic, maybe. What do you think?
As much as I joked about, the Summoner kind of just hands down, the Ranger, who knows how their kind of, I don't know if you want to call it pet stuff, but their abilities have some complications as well. Obviously, the manually targeted stuff is a big deal. Having said that, though, the extent it sounds like they want Summoner pets to kind of be their own thing, that's kind of why I just say instant Summoner. Ranger, I feel, has a lot more like a variance of complications, but I think the Summoner pet is just really complicated because it's almost like another player in my brain. So yeah, I would say Summoner, but not to really put down Ranger at all, because they're, it's got its own complications. So I do think the Ranger is going to come first, though.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. So next we've got Random Rob here. He says, should the in-game /time for Pantheon use fantasy days and months, or use Monday through Sunday, January through December? If fantasy names, how many days should there be in a week? And how many months in a year? I love this question.
Man, you know what? My brain is full when it comes to like fantasy calendars. Like I said earlier, I've played so many RPGs. I just cannot remember another fantasy calendar and the names of the days and the weeks. And I've got Pantheons that if this Hills, oh my gosh, I'm not going to pronounce it, but the IH is their calendar. I know the years. I know it comes from, from the past, and I know the history of it to some extent, but if they're gonna go with like crazy names of days and weeks and months, I don't know if I can remember all that. So
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I immediately thought of the Elder Scrolls universe. You know, they have like Middas and I'm sure other ones that I can't remember right now. But to me, this question is kind of asking, you know, if a day goes by in game, does it pass fully on the calendar for the game, or is it a full real life day that passes on the calendar? Because I think someone mentioned the complications for holidays, for example. If they ended up doing a 1-to-1, you know, if it's a 72-minute day in game, how that would make it really weird. But also it would be equally weird if it takes a full real life day to pass a, you know, calendar day in game, because we know it's going to be day and night and stuff like that. So it's kind of complicated, honestly. Off the cuff, right. Off the cuff, I'm kind of like, man, it would be really cool if they used one of these really like vague or not often used calendar types, you know, with like 8-day weeks and stuff. Like there's other ways to organize a year, which would be really interesting.
Right.
But I think in the end, I kind of just hope that they have in-lore names for days, because I like that, especially if it's easy to kind of pin that to what the actual day. To me, Middas is actually a really great day for Wednesday, because it's the middle of the, you know, or however that works. So
yeah, I can get behind that.
I would like them to do something like that, but it's a really unique question. This is the first time I think I've seen this asked, so thanks, Random Rob.
Yeah, it's a good one. And the last one is actually a super easy answer. So this is from Reasonable Person. They said, will you continue to try to bring up some of those pre-alpha stories, those you've had in here before on the Rewind? I know it has to be approved due to NDA, but it's something I've enjoyed that you guys did. Helps those of us who aren't in it feel like we are part of the experience. So obvious answer is yes, absolutely. I'd love to. We just had the PA testing weekend. Obviously, I'd love to talk about it. Can't talk about it. It's just so much to say, but I will continue to beg, plead, and borrow and steal to do everything I can to get permission for that kind of stuff. The last one that Minus did, I was just like, man, I was inspired, and I want to do something like that for sure, with the fun audio effects and tell a story like that, because that's my jam. Yeah.
Yep, we'd like to. We'd like to, that's it.
Yes. All right. So that's the mailbox. Sit back and relax. It's time for the lore you know. All right. So before we get to the lore, I remembered this time to announce that we will be drawing for the giveaway for the pledged. So if the names have been entered, and good luck to everybody.
Good luck.
But now on to the lore. So the tale of Beliers continues, and last week we continued the tale, and we learned a little bit more about her early childhood and upbringing. So now let's follow up with that. On the day she was to go before the Adahane Council that would decide if she was ready to start the path of the monk, the child carried with her the hopes of her siblings. Standing robed and before the council, it was decided that the child would indeed enter training, yet not as a monk, but a wizard. Without a word, the child was ushered from their sight and separated from her siblings, sent to join the small band of arcane masters. Though the court of her fate seemed to adjourn, the child had one last appeal to make. Beyond the black sand sea that surrounds Suroa, the sheer peak of Gar Lhasa rises high above the wintry wastes of mainland Whitethaw. It is there the Adahane travel to refine and deepen their meditations, as the harsh elements place peril and serenity alongside one another. With her former monk classmates setting off before dawn, the child clothed herself as one of them and secretly entered their column as it headed toward the mountain. High in the screaming seclusion of Gar Lhasa, the group settled for a day of meditation. Unnoticed under her coverings, the child trekked even farther up the narrow heights. As the sun set with weary youths gathering a line, the instructors counted heads prior to departure. One was not among them, and they soon found the child alone in the corner of a cliff. There she sat in meditation, calm, while the frigid winds raged, deaf as the instructors shouted to her to come down. Nothing could break her concentration or form. Motionless as she sat, motionless as the great rock itself, even as the falling night chased away her Adahane teachers. Alone, the snow gathered around the child's feet, piled upon her lap, and rose to her shoulders. Ice formed over her face and hands, and it seemed she was prepared to perish on the mountain. In her final hours, 2 Adahane masters trekked up Garlasa to bring her down, with one breaking her meditation with a strike that cracked the outer layer of her chest. Her performance, he whispered in her ear, would change nothing. She would be a wizard, not for herself, but for the sake of her people. And perhaps, he continued as they carried her dimly lit body down the sheer mountainside, she would become the greatest wizard the Archai had ever known. Thawing on a glass table, ringed by flame-filled crystals, the nameless, broken youth woke to a hooded figure peering down at her face. Still unable to move, barely able to see, she heard words spoken from within the hood's shadow. "Awaken, Bel-Iris." And that's the lore you know.
Oh,
all right,
chills.
Des, another show. Yeah. It's the birth of Bel-Iris. It's exciting. I always forget the lore after I read. Like, I've read it before, obviously, but I forget the details. And I'm like, oh yeah, right, that's cool. I forgot that they hit her like with a monk strike and cracked. That the light faded from within her, and that was sort of the rebirth. Love that aspect of it. So
yeah,
cool stuff. Yeah. Anyway, so. Good show, and congrats to whoever won the pledge. We don't know it obviously now because we are recording this, but we will get in touch and get that pledge to you right away. So thank you to everyone for tuning in to the show. We really appreciate it. Thank you for joining us for the premiere or downloading it on Spotify or iTunes or any of the other podcast platforms that we do. We really appreciate it. And Desrin, thank you again to you so much for joining me every week. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Hope everyone has a great week.
Me too. Yeah. See everybody next week. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Pantheon Plus Rewind. Pantheon Plus is not affiliated with Visionary Realms. Be sure to check out our Twitter, Twitch, and YouTube channels under the name Pantheon Plus. You can follow Theric at Pantheon Theric on Twitter, and Desrin at DesrinDoes also on Twitter. And you can stay up to date with all things Pantheon at www.pantheon.plus. Until next time, cheers, and thanks for listening.